This is an interview with former State Senator Ted Hallock. The date is August 16th, 2004, and the interviewer is George Bell. Let's begin with your boyhood. You were born in Portland.
No, I was delighted to tell you, at Hollywood Hospital in Hollywood, California.
Oh my goodness.
How about that?
I didn't know that. What
Came to
were
Oregon
the circumstances?
Well, the circumstances were I had a mother and father, George.
Good. Most people do.
They were married, and he was working for Marconi Radio and Telegraph at that time, having built radio stations for them in China. And then they came to Los Angeles, I guess, not knowing where they would go. And then 6 years later, they came to Portland, where he founded a little shop that manufactured the first radio in Oregon. Went to grade school in Irvington and high school at Grant. Graduated from Grant.
Were you a Grant student?
I'm a valedictorian in the class.
Were you really? You just preempted my next question in a way, because I was going to ask you what kind of student you were. Must have been pretty good.
No, I wasn't really.
How do you get to be valedictorian if you're not a good student?
Just lucky. I played baseball, a little baseball. I played second base but I couldn't make the, quote, varsity at Grant, and sort of lost interest. And then mainly I became interested in music because of my cousin Homer Welch. And his friend Monty Ballou went on to form the Castle.
Oh yeah, Monty Ballou.
I remember listening to Fred Waring's Glee Club on the radio, listening to the Jimmy Dorsey Band, which had a show Wednesday nights. Andre Castellanets, and CBS was the big,
the big band of
yeah, exactly. And then Benny Goodman's records began to come out on RCA Victor, and we had a wind-up phonograph, and so did my cousin. And then I began to be interested in drums and tag around with him, and he gave me my first set of drums, and I began to play drums with a band at Grant, Pat Riley's dance band, and did that.
But your interest really moved to jazz, didn't it?
Yeah, immediately. In 1938, because again of my cousin Homer, I owe everything to him. He got me in at KGW radio station in Portland, which is owned by the Oregonian. And we had live radio shows, Homicide Squad on Monday nights and Covered Wagon Days on another night. And I graduated into being a sound effects man. I was a marvelous, if I do start to brag, a marvelous sound effects man, because I had my cousin, who was a drummer, and I, as a drummer, had a sense of timing that was just, you couldn't beat it. And so, because this is live, there's no fooling around with recordings. So I did sound effects, and then they gave me a job as a board announcer at KGW with a keen shift from midnight to 8 a.m. And then about that time, I recall I was on duty on September 3rd, 1939, and heard on NBC, which was the network affiliate, Neville Chamberlain announcing that war was declared on Germany.
Did you get into activities as an undergraduate, Ted, on campus?
Yeah, politics.
You got into campus politics?
Yep.
Really?
I was put up, is the expression, by the independent group.
You were not a fraternity boy?
No, I hated fraternities. Fought against fraternities during my entire period. As a freshman class president, and I was elected freshman class president. But then Roy Vernstrom was one of the two guys that they were the puppet masters, and I was their puppet. And I won, and I was the president, and then they wanted me to resign. And I said, you guys just elected me. Why do you want me to now resign? A week later, 2 weeks later. They said, because you're now fed up with the apathy of the freshman class. And I said, how can I be fed up in 2 weeks? I haven't even met the freshman class yet. And so I resigned. And the Oregon,
you did resign.
And the Emerald has got a heading, Hallock resigns Frosh presidency. Wow. And then that began a series in my life that I became very good at, quitting. When in doubt, quit.
We interrupt your academic career when war breaks out in December '41. How do you respond to that?
Well, I remember that because of two things. I was apparently listening at Zeta Hall to the same symphony broadcast that it turns out later Artie Shaw was listening to in Detroit on the stage or in some theater on the stage. Anyway, Toscanini or somebody, NBC Symphony.
Great band there,
or I guess it was CBS, because Bob Trout came on with that famous interruption that the Japanese have bombed Oahu. It was so new. Yeah, they've never pronounced Oahu. We, a group of us, wanted to immediately go down to the beach and defend the United States. We're grown-ups, considering all things. We're not little children. One guy said, I've got a .22 rifle, and somebody said, my dad has got a pistol, and we want to go to the beach, and we didn't.
And the Japanese were going to come ashore at knee tarts any day. Huh?
Yeah, and that's the worst part. My best friend was a guy who was studying architecture, Woody Ishihase. And the first thing that happened to Woody Ishihase was he vanished. And it turns out that he went to Tule Lake. And when I found out about Tule Lake, I thought, oh, Jesus, what's happening in the country? I didn't think about the Pacific War. I wanted to go into the Royal Canadian Air Force because I wanted to really be a pilot. Anyway, I couldn't get in. So then I decided I wanted to go in the Marine Air Force. That was because of the uniform. It's really
pretty snappy.
Marvelous. That gray-green dress uniform, God, you'd kill for that uniform. Went down to the Marines and was underweight. And I did the bananas and half, and it did those like a full diet for 2 days. And went back out, and it worked.
So you went to Officer Candidate School?
Yeah, went right to Santa Ana. I was accepted and would be an aviation cadet. And at the end of that training, I would become either a pilot or navigator or bombardier. And finally, they did call me up, and I went down to the Portland train station and got on the train with a bunch of other misfits and went to Santa Ana, California. The other part of that time that sort of I think of with fondness was in cryptography. And the class in cryptography, to illustrate to you, to me at that time a student, what it meant to use this technique. And they had a device, a cylinder, and it was the forerunner of any code machine that would base the code on a given word or series of words that you'd originate, then wipe out. Well, I was really taken with this machine. I thought this code machine was the cat's ass. I'd never seen anything as exciting. So I decided I'd take it back to my barracks and really study it that night. And around 6:30 that night, it hit the fan. And the joint is swarming with FBI agents. And all the cadets would say, what the hell is going on? You know, the code machine is missing. You know, I thought, well, God Almighty, it's just it's a teaching machine. What do you care? What do you mean, what do we care? And blah, 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 and I've got it right here in my thing. Reached down, gave them the code machine. And they could have washed me out right there, and I don't know why they didn't.
Leavenworth.
but they didn't. I knew I couldn't be a pilot at that point. So, but I wanted to be an officer. And there's a side reason for that. I wanted to marry this woman. And to marry this woman, I felt I had to be an officer and a gentleman. So I picked, what's the least desirable of these three, I say to myself, that nobody really wants to be. All the guys who are washed out pilots end up there. That's bombardier. Nobody wants to be a bombardier. Good. So we had to fill out a form of some kind. Your desire. What's your first desire? Bombardier. I wanted to be a bombardier all of my life, and so naturally I'm picked to be a bombardier.
Talk to us a bit about the daylight raids over Germany, Ted. How many missions?
I flew 30 raids. I was on all of the Berlin raids. By the time the command of the 8th Air Force had changed, Jimmy Doolittle took over, and Doolittle's first decision was that we'd go to Berlin to show Goering that could be done en masse. So March 4th, we flew to Berlin. In fact, we flew March 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th. I flew 4 of those 5 raids, day after day after day. The flak was enormous, but I was hit with the fragments of a 20-millimeter cannon shell, which is what really is what you had to watch out for over on the right-hand side here. An ME-109 came in that I couldn't see. I was looking here, and the navigator didn't see him, and wouldn't have made any difference anyway. And he let fly with it, and they had one shell that was an explosive. Armor piercing. Armor's a misnomer. Is the aluminum skin of the B-17 is a, 1/8 of an inch thick or 1/4 of an inch. Anyway, it came through and exploded on contact, and then when it explodes, it blows as shrapnel all the little copper cladding that's around the shell mechanism, and all that got me in the right-hand side and the elbow and so forth. And then the airplane, we'd get flak damage from the air. About every other raid would be flak damage. And you sat there and your choice was to either defecate, which in one instance I took advantage of and did out of fear, or later I would actually, one time I would start reading comic books to try to do something else. There's nothing else I could do until you got to the IP, the initial point, for the bomb run. We all got if you finished the assigned raids, you got the Distinguished Flying Cross. If you finished, first of all, it was 25 raids when I got there, but then Doolittle kicked it up to 30 raids, so you had 5 more chances to die, which that was the most fearful part of and you got the Air Medal for every 5 raids, so I got the Air Medal with 3 clusters, the Distinguished Flying Cross, and the Purple Heart with cluster. When I finished my tour, I was flak happy.
Sure.
Now that is a polite synonym for half nuts.
Yes.
Crazy.
Sure.
So I was sent to the Don Cesar Hospital in St. Petersburg, Florida. I was there for about a week, sodium pentothal interviews and the whole thing, and then was judged to be, I guess, okay, and was grounded apparently indefinitely. Then I was given actual leave, I guess as a reward for combat, and my then wife and I went to New York. And her brother, Muriel's was my wife, brother, Dick, had been befriended by William Shawn, the editor of the New Yorker. Somebody said that Shawn would like to meet you, so we went. Shawn met us at Bleek's or Blake's, B-L-E-E, the famous bar. Here was Whitney Darrow Jr., Charles Adams, the cartoonist, and his wife, Alva Johnston, who wrote most of the New Yorker, that first column, whatever it's called, in Manhattan, and Shawn and his wife. So I really showed off.
Did you?
I had my battle jacket that I had made in London. Very few guys had them. Very expensive battle jacket that was not regulation, but I was allowed to wear because Eisenhower had one. And I was the festoon with the medals and the thing, and nobody was more heroic and better looking than me.
I bet.
So talk. At the end of this booze-laden, marvelous evening, Shawn said to me, "Would you like to be profiled in the New Yorker?"
Oh no.
And it's like saying, "Would you like to meet God?" or "Would you like to get $1 million cash?" And I said, "You're joking with me." And I said, "No, I'd like you to do it." Well, I guess, I don't know, I mumbled something. I really was flustered. And I said, when do you want to do all this? He said, "Tomorrow morning." So,
The great Brendan Gill.
yeah, tomorrow morning at the Henry Hudson Hotel, the telephone rings at 8 o'clock. Brendan Gill, whom I don't know Brendan Gill. I don't read the New Yorker that much. And he's downstairs, so we went to the Horn and Hardart Automat at 8th Avenue and whatever, and spent 7 hours.
7 hours.
Yeah.
And the result is a profile called Young Men Under Plexiglass.
Yeah. Since 1940, I'd been a stringer correspondent
For Downbeat?
for Downbeat. The
Tell us what Downbeat magazine
Downbeat
is.
was a twice a month magazine thing, printed in tabloid form, about popular music. And
you were writing for them.
yeah, I was writing for them and getting paid per word, in effect. And the telephone rang in November of 1947, and it's Ned Williams, the editor of Downbeat, whom I've never met, never had anything to do with him, and he said, I'd like you to come to Chicago and be the assistant editor. So I said, I gotta have $125 a week. And he said, all right. And you gotta buy me a speed graphic camera because I'd been studying photography at Oregon as part of one of my little courses. I was a terrible photographer, but he didn't know that, and so he let me buy one. It was you could write a book. It was the most exciting time, to go be assigned to cover Art Tatum one night, and then the next night you'd go to the Argyle to cover Miles Davis and Charlie Parker, and the next night you'd go to the Silhouette in Evanston and cover Charlie Ventura, and the next night it's Woody Herman's big band at the Stevens Hotel. I did that, but the drinking finally got to me. Ned Williams was a marvelous guy, former public relations man for Duke Ellington, but he'd bring or have a fifth of scotch in his desk every day of his life, and he would slug it, not grossly, but surreptitiously, sort of, in straight shots all day long, till by 5 o'clock the fifth was gone, and he was loaded and happy and got in his car and drove home. And that got to me, and then the publisher was a drunk too, Glenn Burrs. And
so you saw that as a future you didn't.
Yeah, they were.
It
was sordid.
Yeah.
This is the sordid side that I didn't care for at all.
Sure.
Finally, I quit. I wanted to get into radio, and I felt that now I was equipped to be a disc jockey and get into radio. So,
who knew more about music than you?
So I was finally hired because of a guy I knew at KGW, Tom Swafford, who is now program director of KPOJ in Portland, 1330, the Mutual Broadcasting Company. So they hired me, and I had my own show, Spins and Needles, and for the next 2 years it went well till it lost ratings, and then I became, in time, the program director of KPOJ, and won the Peabody Award and a whole bunch of other awards. I became interested. I was a Democrat, dyed-in-the-wool Democrat, and I was politically active all the time. In my radio career, I was fraternizing all the time with Democrats. Finally, I decided I want to be in that. I want a part of the action.
You began to think of yourself as a candidate,
yeah, and
rather than a reporter.
right, and plus this enormous arrogance that I'm as good as those guys, or better. And finally, this one election, I guess it would be 1962. So I filed and wrote my own ad copy and this and that, and won. The most interesting thing about that was that we had a publication at that time called the Oregon Voter, and Walter W.R. Chapman was the editor, who was absolutely far to the right guy, but he and I fell in love with each other.
Really?
I respected, he was a very smart man. I could respect that, and he saw in me something. So he interviewed me in depth and asked me why I wanted to be a senator. And my answer was, to upgrade the intellectual level of the Senate.
I remember that.
And he printed it. Well, you can imagine.
And that quote came back to haunt you, did it not?
Christ. When I got down to Salem, you can imagine the reactions there.
As I recall, there were some very bright men in the Oregon Senate at
Well,
the
yeah,
time.
Anthony Atturi was one from Ontario, the lawyer.
Indeed.
And he said, I'm here at your disposal. What do you intend to teach me? The most interesting thing about it to me is that here I am, the man who resigned as the freshman class president and who's been a lifelong Democrat and who's been active and fraternized with all these people and my friends and so forth, and Wayne Morris and the gang. And I realized that down there I had to compromise or nothing was going to happen. That's best exemplified by something that happened in my second session, but it's something I did automatically in the first session when Harry Boyman invited me to his apartment, and he said, and we had dinner one night, and I kept waiting for the shoe to drop. Something was gonna, and finally at the very end, Boyman says, oh, by the way, I hear that, here comes the shoe. There is one little thing. And what's that, Harry? Well, he said, if I'm president, when I'm president, and it was a foregone conclusion at that session that you would be, and one of my decisions is challenged, I would hope that you would vote to support me. And I said, hell yes, Harry. Well, you have no idea of the significance of that deal, because what happened is that the first guy to do that was Vern Cook challenging Harry Boyman, and then came wham, a floor vote, and there we are. And I voted, and so. But going back to the first session, I mentally,
which is again 1963.
Right. Ben Musa was the Arab from Hood River was the president. And I got to get along with these guys, and I forget how I indicated to them, except in individual conversations, that I intended to. And I was given a committee, which is, I think, unheard of at that time.
Which one?
The Health and Welfare Committee. And in fact, I'm not sure it wasn't created for me, because it was partially created as a throwaway.
To keep you out of the way?
Exactly. There he is, and if he should deviate from what he's told us, his loyalty, zook! No bills, no nothing. And so I got a couple of bills, I can't remember what, and it was really heady wine.
Do you remember your maiden speech?
No.
On the floor of the Senate? You don't?
Yes, I do. They set me up with their initiation rite.
Yeah, the little hazing that always
Right,
happens.
and which I, oddly enough, didn't. I thought I was smart enough to have known that. And they gave me a bill that would have outlawed outhouses. The outhouses are illegal in Oregon. The bill, of course,
a made-up bill.
It's phony. I don't know that.
Sure.
These are the big, and I've got it. They gave me the bill, and they said, I think it's Atturi, who was famous at this, said to me, you have to figure out the rationale. This is a delicate subject. You have to figure out how you're going to carry the bill.
It sounds like Tony Atturi.
I thought, Jesus, how am I going to? So I invented it, some stuff or facts or whatever I did, and got up and they let me get through about 5 minutes of it before, I forget how they did. One guy objects and somebody does something or other, and then they all...
It tied you up about 18 different ways.
Yeah, and they erupt into applause, and you've been initiated. Two things. Number one was county commissioners. One of the tip-off things in that area is that the rural county commissioners, the chairman will call himself judge. He's no goddamn judge. Never was, never would be. That infuriated me. That was number one. Number two, the venality of the average county commission. You'd like a zoning change? You're my brother. You'd like to change the one-way street to the two-way street? You're my sister. You know, because of, in part, that phenomenon, I discovered under McCall that they weren't all the counties and cities weren't zoned. There was no rural industrial.
Tom McCall, we're talking about, who was elected governor in 1967.
Right. Second thing was that I wanted to be president of the Senate. And we're approaching the 1973 session. I figure I've served my apprenticeship.
You put your time in.
Hector McPherson is unknown to me in Lynn County, thought I had a good chance to become president of the Senate. So he approached me with this idea, which he said he had in draft form. And I took it, it was a huge, thick document, and I sort of read it perfunctorily and thought, maybe this has probably got some merit, but it'll get to the goddamn problem of zoning. It'll get there, won't it? And I oversimplify always, and Hector said yes. So we had the famous caucus, and Bo won. So apparently, out of contrition, because Bo had this exposure to me from the early days in optometry when he had wanted to become a politician, and I encouraged him, by all means, run, Jason. So he gave me this committee, and I.
What was the name of the committee?
Land Use and something, and Environment, I guess it was.
Okay.
But he carefully orchestrated the committee to screw me. So
you were outvoted.
Yeah, 4-3. They couldn't,
4-3.
I couldn't get the time of day out of it. But nonetheless, I got the committee, and Hector was on it. I got Hector on it. Bo had asked me, and I'd named, I think, one person, Hector. In the meantime, Hector had gone through a draft of his first draft. And we started the session with his second or even third draft as the first Senate Bill 100. I said, I'll introduce this, Hector. And he said, would you mind if I put me on it? Well, all right. So I put him on it. It says Hallock and McPherson. That's all it says. Everybody in Salem, in the legislature, when they got wind of this, was on the mind. Can I sign on the bill? No, screw you. We started out, and the potential no votes that I identified fought me every step of the way, every trick. And so I invented some tricks of my own, such as we got into the session about a month, and I'd had hearings, 2 and 3 times a week, which just infuriated the Burns and the Thorns and the Atiyahs, who were used to working casually, leisurely pace. And I realized this draft is just too muddy. Hector, as I get, so I ordered this draft scrapped, and Hector and I produced a very shorter draft. Then we started hot and heavy, and I really got excited, realizing instead of just embarrassing Bo, which was one of my original premises, I could maybe pass this thing, maybe. We finally got another month or so in with very little progress, and I realized this draft was not, we were bucking up too many people, so I did another thing I had done in the Health and Welfare Committee once, called a lobbyist in that instance Dave Barrows, and just said, go out in the hall, rewrite this bill. So Dave came and was testifying, and I said, look, I will name you plus some guys, Tom Donica of AOI, Associated Oregon Industries, somebody for AFL-CIO, somebody from the League of Oregon Cities, somebody from the Association of Oregon Counties. I want you to chair the meetings and call this group together immediately and do these things to the bill.
Okay.
They did. They brought it back in, and I thought, Jesus, Hector, what do you think? And Hector was very pleased. So I said, I don't know, I think I'm oversimplifying this. I think let's just do it. So there was a little matter of getting it out of committee. And here it came. Here we were. The kick vote in the whole committee is Jack Ripper. Well, Jack Ripper has been a conservative Democrat all of his life. He's been a member of the so-called, at one point, coalition that ran the Senate with the Republican Party, even though the Democrats were in the majority. And he's not exactly the brightest bulb in the fixture. He's a bartender from Goose Bay. But I talked and talked and talked and talked, every possible appeal I could make. And finally I said to Hector, I don't know, I think maybe, but we got to try it. Came up for the vote, we got it. Ripper at the last minute. Aye, the bill came out. And it passed by one vote, I think, 16-14.
Good heavens.
And then I thought, uh-oh, here's where I got to really play. Atiya was out of his mind with rage on the floor. Atiya's lying in wait, man, for the House committee. So we got, whoever the speaker was, we got the bill assigned to Nancy Fadley's House committee, Nancy Fadley of Eugene, and I went over, and that's the most remarkable thing about this whole story. I testified before this committee. And I said, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to go into the bill with you. You can do that as much as you want. But if you change one comma, Vic Atiya in the conference committee will screw this bill out of existence and it will vanish. One comma. I implore you to do nothing to this bill. And to my knowledge, in the history of the legislature, this never happened.
Amazing.
They didn't. The bill passed. Atiya's livid. Bo is livid. Bo had meant to punish me with the committee and got screwed. That's the story. And then from then on, so that's why they.
And you ensured Tom McCall's legacy.
I don't.
So doing.
I don't care about it.
No, I understand. I understand.
Tom McCall
That's
had
the way it
almost
worked
nothing.
out.
Yeah, he had almost nothing to do with this.
Yeah. Is that right?
A flat statement of fact. The author, I guess most of the credit is Hector McPherson. I'll accept my credit as the godfather. The obstetrician is even a better example. I decided to retire in 1979 for two reasons. The first reason was I didn't want to ever get beat. Second reason was my eyesight was beginning to fail me at that time. And so I just arbitrarily said I would quit after, I'll serve 20 years. Because I realized I had said when I first ran, typical arrogance, I'd serve 5 terms and quit. I'll upgrade the intellectual level of the Senate, serve 20 years and quit.
You didn't retire from public life because you were appointed shortly to the Northwest.
No, not shortly. It was 1881, but in 1988, yeah, Governor Goldschmidt called and said he's got a vacancy in the Pacific Northwest Power Planning Council. Bob Duncan, the former congressman, quit. Goldschmidt said about 15 times on the phone, now you understand this is only temporary. It's only temporary. And I can see why he's doing this, because I'm a major opponent of nuclear power. I left that out of any stuff to you. Major enemy of the private utilities, and a proponent of PUDs and so forth. And I can see that's in the back of his mind. And all he knows about nuclear, but not the other stuff. But I served with Norma Paulus and got along well with the utilities and did a pretty good job, and was chairman at one point, turned out a fish plan, and served 8 years, I guess.
8 years?
Yeah. In 1998, I read in the New York Times that Artie Shaw was 88 years old and he's still alive. And Artie Shaw had been my hero going back to 1940. I just said aloud to Jackie, my wife, I'd interview him and so forth. And then I immediately thought, no, I don't want to travel, I don't want to do all that. She kept pushing me, why don't you do it, why don't you do it, why don't you do it? So I called, I realized it would be a project. I wanted to do a complete thing, not fool around with it.
Sure.
I was going to call him on the telephone and do an interview for Don Manning, who has a show on KBOO in Portland, and called Shaw, got him on the phone, and talking to Artie Shaw was to me like talking to God. I mean, it's just absolute revere. We did a 1-hour interview, and I was so taken with it that I sat down and wrote him a letter, a 1-page letter saying, I'd like to do a 13-hour biography of you, hours, which means I'll come to California, interview you, and then blend this with a discography of all of your music, thinking that's the end of that. And the telephone rang. A week later, it's Artie Shaw on the telephone. And he says, yeah, okay. Unbelievable. So I had to find the money. Got Arlene Schnitzer to give me $12,000 out of her foundation. and then went down and put in $3,000 of my own, went down and spent a week with him taping 8 hours a day, and came back with 14 usable hours of tape, and spent 2 years putting it together and writing it one section at a time, one show at a time, and got another $50,000 out of the Meyer Foundation, and broadcasted it. It's a totally non-profit venture. Sure. I put in money, didn't make any money, or would expect to, and it's been broadcast on KBO and in Portland and 18 other FM stations throughout the country. The major news is the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation fell in love with it in Toronto and picked it up and has broadcast the series Trans-Canada twice. Okay. So we're very big in Canada. But, and Shaw was, I ended up disliking Shaw personally, intensely, but just he's an amazing man. The political part is what intrigued me, so I began to collect stamps from 3 illicit, illegal areas. The People's Republic of China, number 1. Yeah. And I began in 1956, when I had taken a trip to the Soviet Union and had gone to Czechoslovakia and East Germany and so forth. Mm-hmm. The second was North Korea, the Korean Democratic People's Republic. And the third was Vietnam, where there was just a movement called the Viet Minh, yeah. Ho Chi Minh led. And collecting these stamps was illegal under the Federal Battle Act. And nobody else had them, nobody else collected them here, and I could and did then begin to correspond and get mail through contact I had in Moscow into Pyongyang and Beijing and Hanoi and various other cities, and began to collect these stamps. And I began to get them, that I became sort of an authority.
So I understand you're a worldly recognized expert on those.
The field on the stamps of North Korea, which have now been listed in an American stamp catalog.
You've led such an extraordinary life and left your mark in so many areas, and you've lived through an extraordinary time in Oregon. The state is a far different state today than it was when you were a boy growing up here. What's your view of where Oregon is now? Can you give us a little riff to sort of close out things?
Well, it's on the edge of metropolitanism, which I don't like, and which, in spite of Senate Bill 100, may be unavoidable. I regret very much that its agricultural future may be doomed. And the part that mystifies me is, at one point, a guy had said to me, we can't exist with a service economy with everybody cooking hamburgers for everybody else and producing nothing. Oh yeah? Oh yeah? So I'm very, very sad about that. I don't know where we are. Can we handle the destiny of Oregon and the United States? And well, we better be able to.